It was the kind of day when the wind swept dust through the old wooden depot, rattling the loose shutters and carrying the scent of smoke from the distant blacksmith's shop. And as the townsfolk bustled about, some catching trains, some unloading crates, some gossiping near the general store, a fragile figure appeared among them, moving with hesitant steps, her dress faded from travel, her bonnet drooping low over her pale face, and though she tried to hold herself upright with dignity, the weakness in her body betrayed her, making her stumble as though the earth itself resisted her weight. And when she reached the depot platform where the late afternoon train whistled mournfully, her knees finally buckled, her small carpetbag tumbling to the ground. As she collapsed against the weathered boards, the crowd gasping, murmuring, yet few moving closer, for in such a town strangers were often regarded with suspicion until one man, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a dust-stained hat that shadowed eyes both watchful and kind, stepped forward with a steady stride, his boots striking the wood firmly as he reached her side, and without hesitation, bent low, slipping one strong arm beneath her shoulders and the other beneath her knees, lifting her effortlessly as though she weighed less than a feather, her head falling gently against his chest as her bonnet slipped, revealing the delicate features of a woman worn thin by hardship, lips pale, lashes trembling against her cheeks, and as he carried her, the murmurs of the onlookers followed. Who is she? Did she faint? Why's Jack Carter, the cowboy, taking her? Yet he paid them no mind, for Jack's code was simple. A person in need must be helped, and this woman was in need more than most he had seen. So he moved through the depot, his long strides commanding space, and out into the open sunlight where his horse stood tethered, stamping impatiently. But instead of saddling up, Jack turned toward the dirt road that led to his homestead, just beyond the rise of the golden prairie grass, determined to carry her all the way home if need be, for something in the way she clung, faintly to the fabric of his shirt, told him she had been holding on for too long with no one to hold her back. The walk was steady, his arms never faltering, and as they neared the whitewashed fence of his ranch, the woman stirred faintly, her lips parting with a whisper, "Please, don't leave me here." And though her words were weak, they pierced him deeper than a bullet, for they were not words of someone fearing a stranger but of someone who had known abandonment too many times. So he spoke softly, his voice low and steady. "You're safe now. Ma'am, I won't leave you." And with that he carried her across the porch of his farmhouse, pushing the door open with his boot, laying her gently on the couch near the hearth where the fire crackled warm, and fetched a blanket to wrap her fragile frame. Slowly she opened her eyes, the soft amber glow of the fire dancing in them, and though exhaustion still clung to her features, she looked at him with a mixture of fear and gratitude, asking in a barely audible voice, "Why did you help me?" And Jack, removing his hat and setting it down, ran a rough hand through his hair, replying with quiet conviction, "Because no one should fall where others can see and still be left on the ground." She stared at him then, and a tear slipped down her cheek as though the dam of her silence had cracked, and soon, haltingly, she began to speak of how she had traveled with her little boy in search of her sister after her husband had gone off to war and never returned, of how illness had taken her child on the road, leaving her with nothing but memories and grief, of how she had kept walking despite her body breaking, hoping someone somewhere might offer her a place to rest, until the depot where her strength had finally given way. And as her words spilled out, Jack sat silently beside her, his steady gaze never wavering, his heart tightening at the sorrow she carried, for though he was a man of the open range, more at ease with cattle and horses than with tears, he knew the weight of loneliness well, and he vowed in that moment that she would not bear it alone any longer. Days passed, and under his roof she regained her strength, nourished by warm meals he cooked in his rough but caring way, comforted by the quiet safety of his presence, and though at first she hesitated to stay, guilt pressing at her heart for taking kindness she had not earned, Jack reassured her each time with words steady as stone. "You belong here as much as anyone. My home's big enough for both of us." She learned to laugh again, softly at first when he teased her about how she tried to help with chores and nearly burned the cornbread, and later more freely when he taught her how to ride his mare across the fields, the wind lifting her hair, her cheeks flushing with life, and Jack, watching her transformation, felt his own heart stir with emotions he had long buried beneath duty and solitude. Yet the true moment came one evening as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in crimson and gold, when she stood beside him on the porch and whispered, "I thought I had no home left in this world. But you carried me into one," and Jack, his voice thick with emotion he rarely let show, answered, "Then let it be yours, always." And in that silence between them, something unspoken but powerful took root, a bond forged not out of pity but out of strength and compassion. And though the world beyond the prairie might never know the story of the woman who collapsed at the depot and the cowboy who carried her home, those who did witness it saw not just a rescue but the beginning of a life rebuilt, one step, one breath, one act of love at a time. And to you, dear viewer, if this story has touched your heart, if you felt the strength of kindness and the beauty of hope in these words, I invite you to subscribe to this channel. For there are many more stories waiting, tales of courage, of healing, of people who find each other in the most unexpected places, and by subscribing, you ensure you never miss a chance to feel inspired, uplifted, and reminded that no matter how heavy life becomes, there is always someone willing to carry a little of the cart. The days stretched into weeks, and the woman Jack had carried from the depot, whose name he had since learned was Clara, began to weave her quiet presence into the rhythm of his ranch. And though she still carried the shadow of loss in her eyes, the warmth of the prairie sun and the steadfast kindness of Jack slowly began to bring color back to her cheeks, as though life itself was painting her anew with each sunrise. And she, once broken by grief and exhaustion, found herself rising earlier each morning, walking out into the dew-damp grass to gather water or feed the hens, surprised by the strength returning to her body, surprised even more by the peace that came from knowing someone watched over her. Not with control or pity, but with steady respect, for Jack never asked more than she could give, never demanded her story when she fell silent, never treated her as a burden, only as a soul who deserved rest and the chance to begin again. But Clara, despite her gratitude, could not silence the echo of her past, the fear that one day she might once again be left adrift, and she often stood at the window of the ranch house when Jack was out tending the cattle, her fingers resting against the glass, whispering the name of her lost child into the quiet wind, as though the prairie might carry her love into the heavens where her boy now lived. And Jack, though he never intruded on her private morning, somehow always seemed to appear afterward with a small gesture, a steaming cup of coffee, a blanket draped gently across her shoulders, or simply his silent presence, standing beside her at the window, looking out at the endless horizon with her until the weight in her chest eased just a little. It was during one such evening, when the golden light of dusk poured across the land, that Clara finally asked him, "Jack, why did you never marry?" And though his jaw tightened, he answered honestly, telling her of a time long ago when he had loved a woman who chose another life, leaving him to bury his heart beneath work and solitude, for he had decided then that the ranch would be his only companion. Yet now, his eyes softened as he looked at her. He realized he had been waiting, unknowingly, for someone who truly needed not just his land or his name, but the steadiness of his heart. Clara listened with tears glimmering, feeling a connection deeper than words, and though she did not speak her feelings yet, a warmth kindled in her chest that had been absent for so long she hardly recognized it as hope. As the weeks rolled on, the townsfolk began to notice the change in Jack Carter, the once solitary cowboy now. 2-3 said simply, as though it had already been decided, "There's room, and more than enough work to go around if you're willing." Clara felt her throat tighten with emotion. "Why are you doing this for us?" she whispered, holding her baby close. Luke adjusted his hat, his eyes steady on hers. "Because I know what it feels like to be left with nothing. Lost my family when I was young. A neighbor took me in, gave me the chance to stand again. I reckon it's my turn to do the same." His words sank into her heart like rain on parched soil, and for the first time in months, hope bloomed inside her chest. The days that followed were not easy, but they were filled with something Clara had thought forever lost: belonging. Luke taught her how to milk the cows, how to tend to the garden, how to mend fences and drive cattle. She worked hard, her baby always nearby in a basket of blankets or resting in the crook of her arm, and though her muscles ached, there was a quiet satisfaction in the labor. Each night when the baby drifted to sleep, Clara would sit on the porch with Luke, watching the stars spill across the endless sky. They didn't speak much, but they didn't need to. Silence was a language all its own out there, and in the quiet, trust began to grow. One evening, after a long day of work, Clara's son cried louder than usual. His small body racked with fever. Panic tore through her as she tried everything. Cool cloths, gentle rocking, whispered prayers, but nothing seemed to soothe him. Tears welled in her eyes as she clutched the baby, terrified of losing the only piece of her husband she had left. Luke knelt beside her, his large hand steadying hers. "We'll ride to the doctor in town," he said firmly. "He'll be all right. You're not alone anymore. Clara, not ever again." Those words wrapped around her like a shield, and together they raced through the night, the stars blurring above them. The doctor assured them it was nothing more than a fever that would pass, and relief poured over Clara like sunlight after storm clouds. She turned to Luke then, seeing not just the cowboy who had offered her shelter, but the man who had carried her through her darkest moment without hesitation. Gratitude swelled inside her, deeper than words could capture. Weeks turned to months, and slowly, laughter returned to Clara's life. She found herself smiling when her son toddled across the porch, when Luke told her stories of wild horses and narrow escapes, when the scent of fresh bread filled the kitchen they shared. The ranch was no longer just Luke's, it became theirs. Every nail and board infused with the spirit of family they were building together. One afternoon, as she hung laundry on the line, Luke approached, his hat in his hands and his voice quieter than she'd ever heard it. "Clara," he began, "I meant what I said the day I found you. You deserve a place to belong. And I reckon you and that boy have already made this place into something more than I ever thought.